Alright, folks, today we're going to put ink to page and talk about the changes that have been made in Lorcana in the past week.
So gather around for another episode of Glimmers of Lorcana.
Among the biggest updates this week, we got some text changes to some of the cards.
If any of you guys looked closely at the promo video that Lorcana had put out, you would notice that there were some changes. In addition to now saying that there were definitively 204 named cards that were going to be released, there were some updates to the text on the original D23 promotional cards. Now, Elsa and Cruella had no changes to them. However, Maleficent did have one change. Interestingly enough, her change was that instead of saying that you may banish opposing character, it now just says you may banish chosen character.
Yeah, because there's nothing better than banishing your own characters. Can't wait to see the rest of the mechanics of the game to find out if that even makes sense.
Well, who knows? Might make it stronger, but it definitely does mean that whoever has the original cards have a completely different card.
Well, I mean, there's already had the D23 symbol and the first edition symbol on them, so they're already pretty different to begin with, but you know what? It's very rare that you get to own a copy of a card that's errated before the game comes out, so that's pretty interesting.
Well, that is absolutely true. Up next, we do have Robin Hood, and he had a change to his good shots. His originally stated during your turn, his character has evasive. Now that had a word change and now states during your turn, this character gains evasive. What are your thoughts on this?
This sounds very rules lawyery. I've played several card games in my time, probably more than's healthy for most people, and it seems like it's basically like it's a rules lawyer thing about like timing and duration of ability. Likely they might be doing some kind of things where cards will end up coming out that interact with triggered abilities. So like has evasive sounds more passive than gains evasive, which sounds more triggered. Like you go into your turn, it triggers, it gains evasive. So there might be something like to prevent that from happening, because evasive actually is pretty strong based on the cards that we've seen so far. It's a little bit like flying in Magic. It just creates a combat where only people with evasive can combat people with evasive. It seems pretty strong, so having the ability to counter or interact with those abilities as they go off seems pretty strong. But again, until we know more mechanics of the game, it's hard to say, but I feel like they're probably just doing some cleanup on the text before the game is out to prevent any future issues either with this set or future sets that come out.
And then moving on, one of the more interesting changes is to Stitch. He had quite the change to him. Originally, he had Shift 4. You may pay 4 cost to play this on top of one of your Stitch characters. Adoring fans, whenever you play a character with 2 cost or less, you may exert it to draw a card. And it was updated to, instead of saying Stitch characters, say characters named Stitch. And instead of saying you may exert it to draw a card, you may exert them to draw a card.
Yeah, so I think this one's interesting because all these rules texts changes are effectively going to be for rules lawyering, for tournaments, for gameplay, clarification, that kind of thing. I think this one is originally when it says you may play this card on top of one of your Stitch characters. I feel like there's 2 ways you can interpret that. If you didn't actually get what it was going for, or if you were rules lawyering in a tournament trying to get your opponent disqualified or something, because unfortunately card games have a history of that kind of thing. When it says on top of one of your Stitch characters, it almost reads like it's saying you have to play it on Stitch, as in like a card named Stitch without any kind of modifier to it. Like this is Stitch Rockstar. Take out the Rockstar, you have Stitch, that kind of situation. Or in an advantageous way, someone from Stitch's universe, like Lilo and Stitch. So, like, technically, Lilo could be considered a Stitch character because she's in a Stitch movie. and then you just get like arguments about what's a Stitch character, what do they mean by that. So by clarifying it to characters named Stitch, it would be any character that has the name Stitch. There's actually a few precedents like this in Magic the Gathering with the various planeswalkers. They had to clarify some planeswalker rules with their names and things like that. Because like a planeswalker legendary is not the same as a non-planeswalker legendary of the same name, which happened with like Venser and Venser Shaper Savant and things like that. But I think this is kind of the same thing. I think Lorcana is just going back through the rules lawyering of history and just trying to figure out where they might see some pain points and get those fixed before shipment.
And then changing the it to them along with the same type of thing.
Yeah, so you could potentially read you may exert it to draw a card, as in you exerting Stitch. Whereas by clarifying it to them, you are basically saying it's just a card that you're playing that triggers that ability.
The character with the cost of 2 or less.
Correct. So that's just a clarification. It makes it easier to read and understand the ability. The other thing is it might be an inclusivity thing, because you use it for objects and them for people. So before you were saying, hey, when you play this object, draw a card, and now you're also saying when you play this character, draw a card. You may exert it and draw a card. So I think that might also be a little bit of inclusivity text there. Disney is very big on inclusivity in everything that they do, so it would also make change that they would choose to use terminology that would assist in that. So I think that one's a twofold. I think it's inclusivity and rules and lawyering.
And then finally, the most possibly pedantic change among them is the rules update and text update to the hook.
This one's my favorite.
And his is Challenger 2. When challenging, this character gets +2 power, and it was updated to Challenger 2. While challenging, this character gets +2 power. Quite a same word, same meaning, pretty much update.
No.
No?
When and while are two very different things, especially when you're talking about rules in a card game. So when indicates an instantaneous action. So when I do this, this happens, right? So when challenging, this character gets +2 power. Although I will also say that they probably need to clarify a duration on that, but that's beside the point. So when challenging, this character gets 2 power. So that reads one of two ways. Either it only gets that power at the time it declares the challenge, meaning when it actually starts processing the challenge against the other character, it loses that power because you're now past the timing that it gains it. Or it says when challenging, you gain 2 power. You could also read that as it gains 2 power when it declares a challenge, and then there's no modifier there, meaning it has no duration, meaning it's forever. So depending on how pedantic and how much you want to argue it, it could either mean you get the power at a time where it does not matter, or you get the power permanently and he just becomes Thanos, which is also a Disney property. So hey, maybe that's going to be chapter 3. I don't know. Now, by changing that to while challenging, it creates a timing restriction on that. So it means when you're declaring the challenge and then throughout the course of the challenge you have +2 power, but it also means that when you're not challenging you don't have it. Because it's basically saying you only have +2 power while you're declaring the challenge. So again, this one is probably the most rules lawyery one. This one reminds me of Chaos Orb with Magic, which if you've never heard of Chaos Confetti, you can look it up. People say it's an urban legend, but as someone who was around at the time when it happened and actually read articles in paperback magazines about it, it actually happened. It's a hilarious story, but this is Lorcana, not Magic, so I don't want to go too much into that. But I think this one is actually, of all of the clarifications that have been done with all these cards, the most relevant and the most impactful.
So basically this one was put in because they foresaw somebody basically saying, oh, you can't get +2 in the actual challenge because it only gets it when you're saying, I'm challenging. And in the initial statement of it, then when you get into the actual challenging phase, well, it goes away because by that point you're not in the challenging.
Yeah, or the exact opposite if you are a Timmy, which is an actual Magic term, by the way. That's not just an insult. That's actually a type of player based on psychological analysis. But if you're a Timmy, you could also read that as when you're declaring a challenge, you get +2. And since there's no duration on it, you get to keep it forever, which means he comes a 3 power, 2 toughness this turn, and then the next turn, if he gets to swing again, he becomes a 5 power, 2 toughness because he just gets to keep stacking it. So depending on how you want to read that, that's really poor wording.
It would be an either or kind of thing, and they just didn't want to deal with either or.
Yeah, either he keeps it forever or he gets it at no point when it's actually relevant. So either way, it's broken as written. So by changing it when to while, you close the loop on that one.
Well,
you make it work as intended.
Well, it's a good thing that they saw that before they printed everything out then. Let's hope that none of the cards come to print with a mistypo.
Oh, I desperately hope they come out with a typo. I have a red cheek Pikachu from the base set Pokemon, and considering that card's worth more than most rares as a common just because of its type of misprint, I would absolutely love to see something like that in Lorcana. Plus, it gives the game a little bit of history, a little, pizzazz.
Little oomph.
A little provenance. Moving on, several cards have had a new symbol revealed on the bottom of the card that may be a rarity symbol. Based on the video, it looks like we may be looking at Elsa as a common, Hook as an uncommon, Robin Hood and Stitch as rares, Cruella as a super rare, and Maleficent as a legendary, and we'll explain why. You may be wondering how we came to this conclusion. We have a couple of reasons. First, in the video, the cards were shown in that order, and it would make sense to show them in rarity order from the most common to the least common. However, you may ask, how do you know that Robin Hood and Stitch are the same rarity? Well, if you take a look at the symbols at the bottom, you'll find out that Robin Hood and Stitch share the same symbol, which appears to be either a foiled or holographic symbol that is silver. And then Cruella and Maleficent also have symbols of different colors that also look like they may be foiled or holographic. This is pretty common for rare and higher cards in other card games, for example Magic the Gathering, as it's usually used as like a security symbol to prevent counterfeiting. Now, on the other hand, if you take a look at Elsa and Hook, their symbols are not foiled or holographic in any way. One's just a solid white and the other one's a solid gray. This is very normal for common and uncommon cards because nobody cares about them that much. Like, no one's gonna... It came out really poorly, I apologize. It's because no one wants to counterfeit commons or uncommons because they are common or uncommon. They're just not worth counterfeiters' time, so they don't have to put as much counterfeiting countermeasures into them. Typically, your commons will be either a solid black or a solid white, based on most games, which is why we believe Elsa is a common. We also speculate a little bit on this based on her power and toughness versus Hook's versus their abilities, that kind of thing. We won't know for sure until the set comes out, but this is pretty reasonable speculation based on what we know of other card games and based on what we have seen in the videos so far. One thing that confused me, though, is their set numbers. All the cards do have their set number in the bottom left-hand corner. For example, Elsa is 41 of 204. For most card games, the sets will do either raising order or decreasing order of rarity. So, like, the first card in the set is either going to be the rarest cards. So, for example, with Pokemon, that's where your super rares would be with the older sets. But then you have games like Magic where they put their commons at the beginning. So cards like 001 through 090, so the first 90 cards might be common for most games. But when you take a look at our expected rarity versus the numbers in this game, they don't really match up. It seems like they're throwing commons, uncommons, rares, and legendaries, like willy-nilly everywhere. So while we do believe that the speculation on the rarity is... correct, just based on our knowledge of other card games. The numbering is also throwing us off a little bit. We did take a look to see if the numbering could be based on, like, Dreamborn cards go here and things like that. And that was not the case.
That didn't really work out either because you had the Dreamborn Elsa and then later on you had the Dreamborn Hook. and they were not next to each other.
But the other speculation is maybe they're doing it by universe. So, for example, you have Captain Hook in the Peter Pan universe. So maybe if they're doing multiple printings of Peter Pan cards, they are filling up a gap of numbers around where Hook is. Same for Stitch. Same for Elsa. We have Cruella de Vil. So right now Cruella is number 72. So maybe 101 Dalmatians will be a block of cards from 70 to 79, for example. That's my other speculation on the card numbers. Or it could just mean absolutely nothing. Maybe Disney doesn't care about that. To be honest, I don't think most people do care about that. But it does help when trying to figure out like rarities and things like that usually.
All right. Well, thank you for sticking with us on this journey through Lorcana news. Hopefully you have liked, subscribed, and commented down below. And we will see you next time on Glimmers of Lorcana.